Hello, this video will be about Justin Trudeau, India, a rogue Sikh nationalist, a Chinese property company, the Waldorf Astoria, and the Martian Chronicles. Oh, and snow in the United Kingdom. So let's get started. Just so you know, there's been some snow over the British Isles these past few days. The country has shut down, as it usually does when there's a bit of weather around here. I have pointed out in a previous video that London is further north than Hudson's Bay, so we won't go into that again. But while we're on the subject of Hudson's Bay, I want to have a serious talk with you Canadians. Last week, we in the wider world were treated to the spectacle of your Prime Minister dancing about on a stage like somebody being electrocuted. Jesus, that guy dances like a white man. You know, if there was ever a time when I was just desperate for a mob to descend on someone wielding biclocks and shrieking cultural appropriation, it was then. Unfortunately, no such luck. Trudeau's hosts were just too polite. He then played dress up for the rest of his trip while surrounded, in this case by Sikhs by the looks of things, and in this case by Bollywood stars in suits and ties, while he outshone them in a resplendent over-the-top costume. You know, I've seen British tourists in Magaluf behaving with more cultural sensitivity. Despite all of that, the Indians treated their guest with almost superhuman patience, although I have read that they actually did ask him to leave early, but sort of quietly. I suppose that must have been after the dinner invitation to a Sikh separatist who tried to murder an Indian politician. But whatever they did to get him to go home, you know, turning off the music, yawning and stretching, clearing up the coffee cups, putting on their slippers, that sort of thing, he refused to take the hint. Oh, those poor, polite Indians. We've all had guests like that, haven't we? People of Canada, why did you vote for this guy? He's obviously not a serious politician. Why have you put him in charge of the country? At the same time, back in Canada, Trudeau's government and the people he's put in power have presided over an uncontrolled immigration policy of mostly penniless displaced persons, mostly from the Middle East, which inevitably has had its effect on the housing stock, the medical and education services, and social cohesiveness. While huge chunks of real estate in the central areas of places like Toronto, Montreal and Vancouver have been sold off to a single company called Anbang. No, not gangbang, although it might as well have been called that for the way they're screwing the Canadian public. It's a Chinese company, ostensibly autonomous. Ha! Since when has any Chinese company ever been autonomous? But anyway, Anbang has swallowed enormous swathes of Canadian real estate with a predictable effect on property prices, and it's becoming next to impossible for native Canadians to find anywhere decent to live in the big towns and cities. As I said, Anbang was supposed to be a private company, but it wasn't a big shock, at least to me, when the pretense was dropped and it was officially taken over by the Chinese government last summer. The reason given was Anbang's less than transparent business practices. Yeah, well, I can believe that shady business practices were involved, but I'm not so sure that Anbang was the prime mover. Oh, by the way, if you Americans think you got off scot-free, think again. Anbang got the Waldorf Astoria as well. So, with the temporary Chinese government takeover of Anbang, large chunks of Canada now belong to the Chinese government. That's on the upper levels, while a chaos of immigration is filling up the residential market on the lower levels. So, those of you Canadians who might be house hunting right now in Toronto and Vancouver and places like that, and finding that you couldn't afford a bunk bed in a public toilet, I have to remind you, you voted for him. Why? Now, I don't subscribe to the idea that a people get a political leader just out of the blue, short of an invasion, of course. Hitler came to power in Germany because the Germans wanted him. He blamed the Jews because the Germans preferred to blame some scapegoat rather than face their failed imperial ambitions. Trudeau, of course, is not a Hitler, but he is a symptom of Canada and you, the Canadian people. Yeah, really, you. So who is Trudeau? Well, since his psychiatrically unstable mother dumped him so she could go dancing with the Rolling Stones, it seems to me that the Trudeau family and their relaxed lifestyles produced a set of dysfunctional celebrity children who've grown up in an unstable environment and not knowing altogether who they are. And since Canada attained independence and has become its own state instead of just being a colony, I think Canada itself has been struggling for an identity. And overshadowed by the USA, my theory is that Canadians generally don't know who they are and are too polite to argue with anyone, so have ended up trying to be all things to all men. And for your representative, you've chosen a metamorph like Trudeau. When he's with the French, he's French. When he got an honorary degree from Edinburgh University, he delivered his acceptance speech in an immaculate Scottish accent, by all accounts. When he visits a First Nation tribe, he gets an Aboriginal name and a headdress and wears it. The Aboriginal name, by the way, is Gumistiyi, meaning the one who keeps on trying, which is sort of ironic on its own. But even more ironic is, while he got the tribal name, the honour was bestowed on him by a tribal chief who, I noticed, glories in the name Perry Bellegarde. I don't think that Trudeau really knows who he is, and he has led his country into the same state of existential confusion which you have elected him to do. And you must have known this when you voted for him. I should think that most of you viewing this video will have read the Martian Chronicles. It's a series of stories, but centred around Mars, which was, at the start of the Chronicles, a planet full of creatures who, affected by the mental projections of alien visitors, could make themselves look like whatever the aliens imagined them to be. When American astronauts turned up, the Martians made themselves look like Midwestern small-towners, picket fences and all. When settlers arrived carrying memories of dead children, passing Martians became those children. The Earth colonists arrived in ever-increasing numbers. They swamped the Martian culture, and finally, the Martians died out, basically, of the stress of changing into whatever the Earth people wanted them to be. The only difference I can see is that I don't think the Martians actually voted for it.